Major Sidney Jacques to the stage, the founder of Balance Your Grit. So come on down.
So, kind of intimidating being up here. I'm not a doctor, not a researcher, a lawyer, a CEO, but I am a ranger, and I have a ranger scroll. I achieved that over 5 years ago. I've been the first woman in a couple all-male units. I really only knew infantry maneuver life until now I am learning the elite military intelligence world. I am very comfortable working in all-male units. That's kind of all I really knew, even growing up as a kid, as an athlete, playing sports really only with boys, until I couldn't anymore. 5 years ago, though, I could not imagine being here right now talking to you all. I couldn't imagine sitting on panels, working at symposiums, supporting, putting together women's empowerment groups for different units, talking to different cadet programs across the country. I couldn't imagine not having nightmares at night. I couldn't imagine really finally thinking I think I've overcome some pretty severe disordered eating. I couldn't have imagined not waking up, sweating, sometimes screaming in the middle of the night, standing up straight. And I've worked through a lot of that stuff in the last 5 years. And honestly, I couldn't not forget, speaking honestly or relying on other women, reaching out to other females, reaching out to other people who had gone through what I was going through. I couldn't forget how to ask for help. I couldn't forget how to take a pause when I was really pushing too hard or gritting too hard, because I never learned that. I never really learned how to rely on other women. I never learned how to quit. I never learned how to speak honestly when I was really struggling as a woman. I never learned how to even identify as a woman, what if, wow, am I really being silenced? Are people plagiarizing my thoughts? Am I not taking credit for the work that I'm doing? Am I not demanding a seat at this table? Because I just wasn't taught those concepts. So I'm Major Sidney Jacques. I'm active duty Army. I speak for myself. I'm not adverse really to be here. I grew up playing basketball. Played basketball in college. That's how I found out about ROTC. I got a full ride through the ROTC program. I got my branch and location of choice when I graduated. My first assignment, I was at Fort Liberty in North Carolina as a platoon leader. I deployed within my first couple of years of service. I came back. My first day at my second job, I found out that I was the first woman assigned to any of the 3 infantry battalions in 2nd Brigade, 82nd. So I found that out on the first day. And, if my bra strap pops, whatever, boobs. And honestly, I loved the assignment. I was a little intimidated at first because it's all male, but I was like, you know what? I've been in this environment before. It's going to be way more intense than my first assignment. The guys seem pretty cool. Here's a challenge. I'm a part of something way bigger than myself, which is why I joined the Army in the first place. I know how to play basketball on the weekends with all the boys playing pickup, so I'm just going to approach this the same way. And I absolutely loved it. I had fantastic leadership. I did my second deployment with them to Iraq, to Mosul in 2016, 2016. And I even cried like a baby coming back halfway through the deployment because I didn't want to go to Captain's Career Course. My chain of command was trying to have it waived for me so I could take company command within the unit. And it just didn't work out because it's the Army. And so I came back from my second deployment, and I went to the Captain's Career Course where I was being recruited because by the 75th Ranger Regiment because they were just starting to include women into their ranks. They reached out and said, you crushed it as an S1 in your battalion. You're physically fit. Think about it. So I thought about it, and then I built a packet. I started training. I went to RASP 2, and I was the second woman to pass RASP 2. And I also found out that not only was I just going to be working there as a captain just outside of the captain's career course, I was going to be filling really a senior major position that I was not qualified for whatsoever, going into one of the most elite units with an extremely severe manning crisis. And it was my job to fix it. But I also knew that I could fix manning problems. I took, my battalion in the 82nd from being the worst S1 shop in the division, which was told to me on my second day at work, and made it the best. Made it the best S1 shop in the division within a year and a half. So I was like, okay, I've been here before, I can figure it out. So I get to 75th Ranger Regiment, and immediately that's my first job, is at least define the problem, get some stats, make some charts, blah, blah, blah. But I also had to go to Ranger School. So 3 months into my job, after creating a product that went up to the Chief of Staff of the Army's desk, so we try to use it to identify problems within the infantry corps as a whole. 3 months later, I went to Ranger School. Spent 6 months there, not because I didn't know what I was doing or because I wasn't physically fit. When it's a 62-day course. Once I graduated, I then became the first woman to have a Ranger Scroll and a Ranger Tab in the U.S. Army. And I never really took a pause. I never took a second to think, what am I going through right now? What were these things? What was this abuse that I just experienced in the last 6 months? The standards were not easier for me. If anything, the standards were borderline unattainable by anybody. The standards of the men who were having their looks at the same time as me were sometimes unattainable for them as well. I already knew I had a higher physical fitness standard than Ranger School because that's what it was for RASP, the selection I went through before Ranger School. I wasn't prepared for the amount of online hate that my father in the last year of his life was reading on Facebook. I wasn't prepared for the amount of comments to my face. And I'm not saying any of this to woe is me. I'm not the only one that faces this, right? But it really took a toll on me, and nobody knew that I was struggling. I just put my head down, I worked through it, and I just said, work hard, prove yourself, work hard, prove yourself, it'll eventually get better. And I really worked myself into a pretty dark place that I didn't even realize was happening. So, about 3.5 years later, I kind of became the AG personnel, S1 for the female Rangers. Thanks, Chris Garrett, if you're watching this. And I was talking to another woman who needed some S1 advice. She was going through some stuff. And on our third phone call, she finally broke down to me and she said, ma'am, I haven't been fully honest with you. I'm really struggling. She was there for X amount of months, and she's like, I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you were in this environment for so long. I feel like I'm failing you. I feel like I'm failing what the women achieved before them being in this environment. And I shouldn't have done this. I'm not strong enough to do this. And that phone call turned into maybe a 2.5, 3 hour phone call where I said to her, I'm about to share with you something that really only a few people in my life know. And that was the first time I really shared, what I had experienced socially. And not necessarily, physical data stuff. I passed all the physical tests. It's more of that covert shit. And we had a really long phone call, and I realized at that point that my work really wasn't done. Obviously I'm still in the Army, so there's that work, but for what you represent and what I represented, which I didn't really ask for, it was just a part of my job. But she said to me, I had no idea that you went through this too. And that really sucked to hear, because I made a promise to myself when I decided to go on that path that I'm doing this for those younger Sydneys, I'm doing this for men that don't feel like they fit in. Really all minorities, or just anybody that feels like, you shouldn't be here, you can do this. And I wasn't being honest. I wasn't reaching back to other women. I wasn't talking to the other women in my unit across the street. because I was so focused on my job. And I think honestly it was because I was so nervous about hearing from them that they loved it and that they were doing great and they were thriving, and I wasn't. I think I would have felt even more confused about the environment. And this is not a bash on any unit. I am not the only one that feels this. I think as women, we are so extremely resilient. And we think that if we ask or if we bring up something that we're struggling with, it's going to expose us as being weak. I do think that if I had spoken up more, men would have been a little bit more open to it, but I just kept my mouth shut and just focused on the job. So that phone call then turned into me actually creating a Facebook page, going in and joining the Female Ranger Support Group on Facebook, which is a closed population. And I realized that there were like hundreds of women in there at this time. At this point, I think there was only probably like 80 female rangers at this point. And I actually took a few days, like I drafted up this whole post, it took a few days, and was like, oh my God, am I really doing this? Because I went through the whole page, I didn't see anything about like social, emotional, mental stuff. A lot of it was prepping for school, which is fantastic. And I put this long post up that was like, hey, if you're struggling with this and this and this, you know, if you feel like you're going crazy, if you feel like you're losing yourself, like you are losing your voice, you don't know what's going on, I wrote this long post. I also just offered like talent management and career advice because that's also a part of what I'm trained in. And I put my cell phone number and I was like, hey, you know, if you need someone to talk to, I didn't know who to I didn't have anyone to talk to. What woman was I going to talk to? I was, you know, the first to do it. And here's my cell phone. If you want to talk, just hit me up. And my phone, you know, I was thinking maybe one or two. Because in my mind, you know, these other women, like, they're the most badass women in my mind. I was even intimidated by them. I mean, imposter syndrome. My phone did not stop ringing. It did not stop buzzing for like 2 or 3 weeks of women saying, I thought I was the only one. I thought I was the only one with paranoia. I thought I was the only one with nightmares. Like, yes, I have a TBI. You know, majority of all of us have a TBI of some sort. But it wasn't related to that. I thought I was the only one like seeing things that weren't actually there. Yeah, I was hallucinating a lot more at Ranger School. You know, just all of these conversations. That's like we really didn't talk about this stuff. Even when I was meeting women, like you have to say in that presence, in that space, not showing any weakness at all. And I realized after a few months of having these phone calls nearly every day, really long, emotionally charged phone calls, conversations with even women who are in this room, and speaking. And I created Balance Your Grit. I created this Instagram, and I was like, am I going to get kicked out of the Army for this? Like, whatever. And I was like, I'm probably going to get in trouble, you know, but people are going to say shit, people are going to comment, so what else is new? And, you know, you go online, you're going to see it anyway, even if it's not under my control. So I was like, okay, at least I'm creating a space. There isn't really, there's military influencer pages of women who are doing really awesome stuff and talking about their own specific things, but, you know, coming from the special operations world, coming from, you know, talking to these female operators, female rangers who don't even have social media. And if they do, you wouldn't know what their page was. But there's nothing really talking about that stuff. There's nothing really super, like, talking about the paradox of grit. You know, talking about, you know, that grit that got me to where I was, the grit that got me to be so successful in my job, to deal with all of this covert hate. That grit is what made me really kind of fall apart. So I wasn't taking care of it. I wasn't sustaining it. I wasn't maintaining my grit. So that's where the term Balance Your Grit came from. And that's kind of the main focus. It's evolved over the past few years. And that's also what has brought me to doing a lot of, you know, panel work and talking. And originally, like I said, it was very much focused on like balancing your grit and taking care of that grit that got you to where you are. And in October, I was asked to be on a panel for AUSA, which is pretty much the annual war convention for the Army. And I was on a panel, and the first question was, what's your definition of leadership? And the three other panelists looked at me to answer first. And I don't think my answer landed very well. I didn't really know my audience, but I'm so proud of my answer, and I'm gonna expand on that now. And it's this missing ingredient of leadership that we don't really talk about, we shy away from. It's kind of a dirty word. It's emo, but whatever, I'm a 90s baby, so. And it's loneliness. And we hear about, it's lonely at the top, but it's lonely everywhere if you're a leader, at every rank. To step up and to step forward into a space that no one else is doing next to you, that's leadership. To speak up when no one else is saying it, to come up with new ideas, to come up with new systems, to research new topics, to start new apps, to integrate yourself into a space that's skeptical of you. That's leadership. Asking a question when no one else has their hand raised, going up and introducing yourself to someone who is extremely successful in their career field and you're just starting out, and asking, can I get on your calendar to talk to you? That is lonely, because no one else around you is doing it. And you cannot lead without being open to that loneliness. And I think back, especially being in S1 and being in that trusted circle of infantry units, military intelligence units, elite units, and as a woman, being really good at observing, being really good at reading the room, being very empathetic, based out of, protecting myself, understanding who I'm around, understanding the enemy. You become very good at observing. And for the incredible men that I worked for, they were very comfortable in that loneliness. Seeing a vision of where they need to take their paratroopers and take their rangers, even if they're uncomfortable, because they see the big picture and they strategically look at things. You are alone in leading until other people catch on and they follow you. And that's where that loneliness turns into leadership, where other people hear you, other people watch you, and they start to follow you. And you take that terrain. And in this world of ambiguity and modernization, with our military right now, I can really only speak for the Army, and I'd imagine it's probably similar to the other branches, or the other services. We're going through this crazy identity crisis. And coming out of a 20-year war, prepping for our next war, or current war, depending on how you look at it, there is a huge green space. That term has been used a couple times of opportunity and ambiguity. And who better to step into that space than the population of people who understand that loneliness and understand how to lead. I never really knew how to harness or identify that loneliness and use it, and that's why I'm talking about it now, and I talk about it with a lot of the women that I work with, where it's we already know what that feels like to be doubted. We already know what skepticism feels like. We already know, that hesitation of speaking up or that shaky voice when you're asking for help. We're already extremely familiar with that well before we joined the military as women, and minorities at that. And now is this opportunity of modernization where we're looking for new ideas, and we're looking for people to step up with new systems. And who better to do that than those of us who already know what that feels like to step up, and not shy away from that loneliness, but actually use it and harness it to lead, and allow other people to see that we are leading. We do have this innovation. And we're looking at characteristics of women, that patience, that teamwork, empathy, collectively pulling the team in together. These are all the things we desperately need in the military right now with modernization. And I'm not saying just deal with loneliness. I'm not, there's that's the paradox of loneliness in my mind, which is if you don't, at some point you have to keep it from destroying you and to sustain your leadership. If you are too comfortable in it, and it can become very self-destructive pretty quickly. And a lot of the women I talk to through my page, they're at that point. You know, these are women who are, you know, I'm intimidated by women who outrank me, NCOs, cadets, peers, and even women outside the military, where a lot of the times when the point at which they reach out to me, they're kind of falling apart. And I understand that's a bias group. So it's like, how do we keep that from happening? How do you use that loneliness, not shy away from it, become empowered by it? How do you protect that grit? And there's a couple things. Like one, it's looking at what you're willing to sacrifice. I get it, we're in the Army, you know, I'm willing to die, right? But at least to be sustainable in my day-to-day life, like what am I willing to sacrifice and what am I willing to not sacrifice? And do I have a support group of different men and women and minorities to help keep me in check and see those indicators of when I'm starting to sacrifice things that I don't want to? I'm probably over time, I'm sorry. And I know I'm keeping you for lunch. So that's really what I wanted to talk to you about, is that, yes, like leadership is a lot of these like very masculine, competitive, intense, you know, words that we put into it. However, there is power in looking at things in a diverse way, and we've seen that with women coming into the workplace. Looking at problems differently, that's how I solved a lot of problems that men before me couldn't solve. It's because I was looking at it from the lens of being different. And that is a very lonely feeling. But that's leading. It's being willing to look at, you know, attack a problem differently. And then other people start to follow, they start to catch on. So